I always want to say you're not alone. You are not
Mhm.
alone. And it just feels so good to just be able to talk to somebody who also has probably done or felt all the things that you have experienced.
Everybody, welcome back to Project Happy Home. For those of you who are new here, I'm Tanya, a doctor lawyer turned homeschool mom of 3 kids, ages 13, 10, and 8. In today's video, I will be talking to Maren Goerss, and we will be discussing some of our biggest mistakes in homeschooling our kids and raising our kids who have ADHD in particular. But honestly, these rules kind of apply to everybody as far as I'm concerned. First off, I'm going to introduce you to Maren and just let her tell you what it means to be an ADHD parent coach and also just how that process works if you
Mm.
decided to go that route. Because I think personally, having someone guide you through what you're doing in a third party kind of way is really, really helpful. Like being able to share in a judgment free zone kind of the things you're going through and what you're experiencing in your family and hearing the types of advice someone would give you, especially someone who's been through it personally themselves, is invaluable. So with that, I'll let her introduce herself and tell you a little bit more about all of it.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Yep, my name is Maren Goerss. I have been the co-host of Homeschool Unrefined for the last 6 years.
So
I was a teacher for a long time. I have my master's degree in education. Homeschooled for about 10 years, and now I am an ADHD parent coach. And like Tanya said, and that just means that I come alongside you in your parenting journey wherever you are, and I meet you right where you're at and really get to know you. It's not like therapy where we don't like go back into your past and which is also really valuable. I always I'm a big proponent of that, but this is more just like here and now and what's going on in your life today and how we can help you get to that next place that you really want to be. Coaching should never be like super hard or frustrating. It's just really this process of almost, I like to think of it as like almost unfolding and figuring out, what really does work best for you. Sometimes we're just working so hard at things and not realizing that it's just not the way that's working for us. And so when we do realize that, our life actually gets a lot more enjoyable, less stressful, and there's just like so much more connection. And so that's what I like to help with.
what would you say to people who have this hesitancy to go into like any type of coaching or counseling type of
Mhm.
situation? Because I think particularly as parents of kids with ADHD, where we've had a lot of, tension and push and pull,
Right.
I think on all sides, people have done things that they wish they wouldn't have. And then how do you get over that hurdle of sharing that?
Yeah, well, I always want to say you're not alone. You are not
Mhm.
alone, and it just feels so good to just be able to talk to somebody who also has probably done or felt all the things that you have experienced.
Mhm.
And just to know that it's not anything that you need to be ashamed about or anything. This is just like, this is a learning process. Life is a learning process. And we're just, we're all figuring it out. And then just doing that alongside someone who will listen, really just listen and ask you lots of great questions to help you understand what, how to move forward is just, I feel like it is just invaluable.
Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
agree. I think even for myself, when I first started making these videos, it was very helpful to just read through comments
Hmm.
because then I knew other people felt things theoretically. Theoretically,
Right.
you understand that you're not the only one. But I think hearing it in a one-on-one kind of personal way is so impactful and relieves so much guilt, that we can build up over the mistakes that we've made in small ways and in bigger ones, the habits that we've developed. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
I will leave all of Marin's information in the description box down below. So if you guys are interested, be sure to check that out. And you can just hit that little triangle and expand the box, and you'll have all her details there. I will share her website, but also her Instagram information because she shares a lot of good stuff over there. To get into the meat of our video, I'm going to let you start with one of the biggest like mistakes that you think you made
Yes.
or
See, and we're gonna start with also no shame here, right, Tanya? You and I,
yeah.
we're we're sharing our biggest mistakes, you know, to kind of like just uncover. Let's just uncover it all, right? And then there's no shame in it. So,
Exactly.
one of my biggest mistakes is expecting to do things a certain way. Oh, and you know, and it often feels to me like it's the most efficient way and, you know,
Yeah.
easiest way. I often think we have to do things this way and just be done with it. Can we just be done with it? But really, especially for someone with ADHD, the way we get from one place to another is often very different than a neurotypical kid or person. And oftentimes if we are able to be flexible and creative in ways that work for your child or for you. Sometimes it's, you know, maybe it's you too that needs something different, right? It really models this like thinking outside the box, which is really how a lot of people with ADHD think anyway. And so to be able to have that freedom to be able to think outside the box, you know, that opens up their whole world. They're like, oh, I can do this. I'm allowed to think this way.
Yeah. And I think that
feels
runs
good.
to their creativity too, right? Like giving them an opportunity to share a possible solution to, you know, an
Yes.
issue you guys are having is so powerful. I remember for like laundry, I just thought, you know, it's really simple to bring down your laundry basket on your day and do your laundry, but it just wasn't happening. And then when I made it, you can throw your laundry over the banister and like onto a sibling. And then like, then you can go down and do your laundry. Everyone started like doing their laundry because then it became like a fun activity.
Yeah.
It still gets done. It's not the most obvious or efficient way to do things, but the end result was positive. Like people had a good association with the whole process. And that it's that type of stuff. And people will say too, but they're going to have to learn to do it the regular way at some point. And to that, I would say, do they really though? Like in the end, I mean, one day when they have a house, they can totally toss their laundry across the room and pick it up like and take it to the laundry machine. Like it's perfectly fine to have a creative way, even as an adult, to do things.
Absolutely. And even if there is something that they do have to maybe fall in line with eventually, they'll do that. They'll do that when they're ready and need and when it's necessary. It's not something that they actually need to learn when they're young. It'll something that'll really happen.
I would say one of my biggest mistakes goes with that laundry story because it's calling out instructions at a distance for almost anything. Honestly, you can insert any instruction at a distance and it just didn't go well. I realized two things. One, I wouldn't really shout out instructions at anyone but my children.
Right.
You know, like I wouldn't shout across the house at my husband or a coworker or anything like that. And I can take the time. I truly can take the time to walk over, find them wherever they are and touch them, you know, like on the shoulder and get their attention, make that connection and say, hey, do you mind doing X, Y, or Z for me? You know, can you get to it in the next 5 minutes? And then also giving them a little help because sometimes they'll forget. Let's set an Alexa reminder right now. Like, what do you think would be a good time? When are you done with this? I think, that choice piece, making contact with them, that changed so much for me.
And then and it also just conveys this message that you really care more about them than the task. That, you know, our connection is most important. So, and then also I think sometimes with those tasks, when you ask your kids, especially kids with ADHD, to do a task at a distance can be overwhelming because that task may seem really big. With ADHD, there may be like 5 subtasks within that, you know, that request. And so even to when you're nearby, you may even be able to notice that a little bit more and say like, oh, actually, you know, let's just start with this one little part. And so when you're nearby, you have that proximity and you're also coming from that place of like almost curiosity. Instead of, you know, like demanding or whatever, you know, you start to understand like exactly what might be the challenge.
And it gives you a second to respect their time, right? Like generally they are engaged in something that they're super interested in if you're having to call at them from across the house. Because one thing ADHD kids are not is bored often. You know, they're usually engaged with something. So that way you can say like, I see that you're doing this right now. Do you think you could do this in 5 minutes? If not, like, tell me when. You can
That
respect them in that way.
I think that's really great. And that's just a life skill for them also to like
Mhm.
kind of understand how long something's going to take and when I might be able to do this next thing.
That respect and connection piece always goes together.
Yeah, that's another thing. Like I definitely wouldn't ask my spouse or a coworker to do something immediately when I ask
Exactly.
them.
Exactly.
Drop
And
everything.
very few things have to be done immediately. I
Yeah.
think we get into the habit, especially if we've run into problems for a while with our children, with obedience and listening, that listening the first time and being able to drop everything becomes like a sign of respect. And when they don't,
Yes.
it's like disrespect. And I think disengaging ourselves from that narrative is really powerful.
Yep,
They are
absolutely.
individuals with their own interests, and that's perfectly valid. And nothing really has to be done exactly when you say it has to be, unless you're
Right.
like in the middle of a fire. Like,
Right. And we've
so.
talked on the podcast Homeschool Unrefined about how, there's respect. A lot of times, we as adults like to teach our kids respect for authority when really what might be better is mutual respect. Let's teach mutual respect. So like we show respect and they show respect to each other. We
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I don't think it's helpful to say you have to earn my respect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially when you say it to kids. I know this because, again, back to mistakes. Like, I have thought
Right.
this and said these words, like, you will earn my respect by offering me this type of respect. And if you're already dealing with a brain that is wired for difficulty with, societally accepted rules of what constitutes respect,
Yep.
like being able to pay like rigid attention, being able to hop to, being able to remember all the
Right.
steps of something, I think that you're setting yourself up for failure, right? I mean,
Right.
they're never going to meet that standard. You are always going to
Absolutely.
be frustrated. Like, you're always kind of
Absolutely.
at odds.
Yeah.
So,
My next biggest mistake is not giving enough space. And I would say probably physically and time wise. Physically, I mean space, meaning allowing space for messiness, projects, things like that. And I have also really worked hard on letting go of bedrooms, like
mhm.
what my kids' bedrooms look like, especially because I want to give them that space to truly be themselves, and sometimes that's just a big mess. And although there are there are boundaries around that, including food and drinks and things like that. Like we are not going to grow, mold in our
Yeah.
in our bedroom and things like that. But there are spaces that our kids, there's a lot of things they can learn from their own messes.
Hmm.
And when they figure out it's time to clean up, that's maybe the most powerful cleaning lesson they'll ever have is like when they've decided I've had enough.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, that was tough for a long time for me. Like that,
Yes.
the mess piece was hard. It really was because my house is never like magazine ready, but it is pretty neat. And
Hmm.
I operate best in a neat environment. And the amount of like hidey holes and
Yeah.
squirreled away, like, quasi treasures and things like that were accumulating in my son's room were overwhelming to me. I think for me, it helped because I do think you should honor yourself too. There's your
Absolutely.
mental health matters, right? As a parent.
Definitely.
So for me, what helped was saying, okay, I'm going to give you all these bins. We're going to work
Mm,
together to like label them the way you think makes sense, not the way I think makes sense,
right.
the way you think makes sense. So it was a group activity. We literally dumped everything he owned into the middle of the room and we did this thing, and it was a project. And it was fine. And it wasn't like in the midst of like me finding a mess and screaming about it. It was like pre-planned. He selected baskets, the whole thing.
Mm,
Then I simply said, the rule is, because the bin thing didn't really solve the problems, but
right.
the rule was,
Yeah,
let's
yeah,
just keep our floor clean,
for sure.
like you have a million bins, like put it in bins,
Right,
just
right.
you can have all your surfaces can be like mad scientisty, that's fine. But the floor, let's just make the floor like clean by the time
Yeah.
you go to bed. And I think
I,
he could
yeah.
deal with that. That
I think
was
that's great because it does give them like a parameter and it does
Mhm.
help them realize like that actually feels good to have a clean floor. I can walk wherever I want. I can
Exactly.
find the things I
Yeah.
need.
And he
And
said,
that
he's like,
is,
I have so much space to build now,
yeah, yeah,
because this was in his
right.
Lego era. And it helps when they find the advantage to something on their own.
For sure. For sure. Yep. And then just like giving them the tools to
Mhm.
do their own type of organizing is also really great. Like those bins or whatever, might have gotten done the way you would have organized
Mhm.
that, but he's figuring out a system that works for him.
Yeah.
And that will definitely develop too over time, right? And then, in our dining room or, places like that, like shared spaces, we often have maybe shelves that were like
Mhm.
unfinished projects can go here. Like I don't want to put them completely away because oftentimes our ADHD minds are kind of like continuously working on
Mhm.
on something and it's never really closed or and so it's always good to like just be able to set aside projects and then be able to also have that, like you said, like definitely have that space that's really important and needed for you. But also I wanted to say like giving space for time and exploring interests too, because like you said, kids with ADHD are very interested in just like so many things and not bored most of the time. They're usually
Mhm.
finding something to do all the time, and so a lot of the most just amazing ideas and learning happen in sometimes the space.
A lot of their
So,
most passionate interests get developed when you're not really facilitating every step of the way.
right?
So for
Yes.
homeschool parents in particular, I would say like if your kid develops an interest in something, don't immediately go to outschool. Like sometimes just let them
Yeah.
have the interest in it. And then
Hmm.
you could ask, do you want to take a class in this? And if they don't discount their hobby because they don't want to
Right.
make it an academic pursuit.
I have killed so many interests by
Yes,
making it formal learning. I have,
exactly.
yes, I've bought all the books and watched all the documentaries and then it just, it killed the whole
Yeah.
interest. And oftentimes those interests just amazingly bloom so much when
Hmm.
it's on their
Yeah.
own. But there is a balance there too, which you'll find with
Yeah,
each kid, right?
exactly. I
Yeah.
think giving them access to resources for where to find more
There you
information
go.
is more helpful. Like the library has a lot of books on this if you
Yeah.
wanted to check it out. But you don't
There you
have to
go.
schedule it into their day because that's just another thing. Yeah.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant.
So
That's perfect.
I would say my second mistake, and we've talked about it a little bit already, is saying too much. Just
Ugh.
this word vomit that happens. Sometimes when you're being nice and you think you're thinking back to all the articles you've read and all the helpful hints you've heard and you're like, I'm going to say all of them right here
Yeah,
and we're going to like grow together as humans. And sometimes you don't need to go into all of that detail. Like you can just
absolutely.
say like, I understand what happened. I always use the same old the baby brain, mama brain thing for like prefrontal cortex and amygdala. And I'm like, just grab onto that baby brain. It's okay, like, but that's all I say about that. I
Mhm.
don't then go into all of the things we've talked about at other times, like how that works and what we can do. And sometimes you just have to like let them have time to process things,
Right.
and get it done. And same thing with getting instructions across or the steps of doing something. Like sometimes it's fine to just say, I need this to happen today.
Yes.
Do you need any help with that? And then if they say no, let it be no, even if you know that they don't know how to get from A to B. Like let
Right.
it just be until they ask you because
Yes.
they
And
stop
it
listening after a few minutes.
right. Yes, they do. Yeah. It just
Yeah.
doesn't even matter anyway. I mean, I remember this even from my early childhood family education classes. They
Mhm.
suggested, just use one word. If,
Mhm.
if, five, you may do 5 or 10 words, but really maybe you can just whittle it down to one word like toothbrush or
Yeah.
um
Sucks.
socks.
Yeah.
And they know what you're talking about. You don't
Exactly.
need to give them a whole like remember I told you this and this and there's like
Exactly.
you could go
Yeah.
through the whole thing, but it may be more powerful to just use one word.
Sometimes going back to that one word thing, we have code words for certain things. Like when we stop paying
Nice.
attention for an extensive period of time, and I've just noticed that like the math has stopped for like 20 minutes, like I'm like
Yeah.
squirrel. And then that means like that I've noticed that you've been on a squirrel for a while. And that's all. And it's like a cheerful, non-judgmental
Yeah.
observation word, right? So,
I
and we
love
have
that.
hilarious ones, like when someone says something especially like clueless for whatever reason. And I can't even remember how this came to be. We say Holland. And then people laugh, and it's okay to have done the thing that you we're doing,
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. Yep. I love
yeah.
that. My last biggest mistake is just not celebrating mistakes. And I just want to explain that a little bit. Just thinking that like mistakes are, bad. And I don't even mean just like mistakes like spilling the milk or something. That's a mistake. But also a mistake might be, not listening to your parent or, it might be something that they really even consciously did or, were unkind to their sibling or something like that. And um we often think, well, I have to have consequences for that. And that's the only way they will learn is like we have to really let them know. And I just think, especially for someone with ADHD, like you said, a lot of times those things happen. With their prefrontal cortex is just not really online always, or it's just a little laggy, and so they're working on this fight or flight response that's just their strongest part of their brain, and it often takes over, and it's not really their fault. Although there are consequences, there are a lot of natural consequences that actually happen because of those things anyway, and so even just to process through those consequences or like what was going through their brain and like tools. I mean, just proactively talking about like tools that might help you make a different decision next time. Those things are so much more powerful. But even when my kids do like make a mistake, like break something, my first reaction, like real quick reaction is, are you okay? Meaning like, and I don't do it like a freak out, like, oh my gosh, what happened? Are you okay? It's just like a quick, oh, hey, are you okay? And that also just messages them that I really care about you more than that glass that just broke, or I really care about you than this mistake that you just made, because you're more than your mistakes. And you're just learning. You're just like, we all do that kind of stuff, and it's totally fine. So, and it also tells me that it's actually okay too, because my internal response is sometimes like, why did you do that? Why weren't you thinking? Why didn't you just put that away before it broke or something like that? And so when I say, oh, hey, are you okay? It also reminds me that it's okay. It really is fine. This is just normal learning that happens. That's how we learn.
Yeah, for sure. For all of us, right? And I mean, that mistake piece, when we make mistakes, how would we like someone to act when we do the thing? You know, like if that had been us, or I mean, the million mistakes that we each make a day, like how would we like someone to respond to us in that moment?
Yeah.
We didn't do that intentionally.
Absolutely. And I feel like mistakes are like, there's always like a tree, one of those trees, like decision trees where it's like, yes, no kind of thing, where every time you make a mistake, you can go either way, where it's like a learning mistake or a shaming mistake, almost like, which one do you want it to be? Let's make it a learning mistake. So then, there's so many more positive consequences that come from that than like the shaming part, which just never really ends well.
Yeah. My third biggest mistake runs right with that shaming piece, which is comparing your child who has ADHD or any kind of neuroatypical difference with your more neurotypical children, or just your children who have better executive functioning, honestly, because so much of childhood reprimands is about executive functioning. Did you remember to do this? Did you do this properly? My eldest ran into the difficulty of having a sibling just 3 years younger than him who has exceptionally good executive functioning skills, like truly on like the higher end of the spectrum, where she would remind me about, the schedule and like what we needed and sunscreen and things like that. So I think that was especially difficult. And I think our children with ADHD, one thing they are not is unaware. And they are very aware of like what their siblings' strengths are when it's directly contrasted to their own weaknesses. You don't have to point it out. They are already aware, and that's not fun, So
exactly. It's so true.
Yeah, I think it's really easy to get into that trap of saying like, even if you try not to, where you say like, look at how well this happened. Maybe don't say that. Like, just even if it's not saying anything wrong with them, maybe just don't highlight the exceptionality of this executive functioning skill, in one sibling to the other. Yes. I've definitely been guilty of that because, I mean, at a certain point before I knew my son had ADHD, I truly couldn't understand what was happening. like why the
Why
3-year-old
does-
could do
yeah.
all of this easily and the
Right,
6-year-old
right.
could not. So if you've been
Amazing.
there, I think we've all been there.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh,
So,
yes. That's why we, in coaching, I really like to come from a strengths-based approach too, because oftentimes people with ADHD really like as much challenges as they may have, they have as many strengths and really gifts to the world. And I think there are so many gifts that the world really needs that I think come from a lot of neurodiversities. And ADHD is one of those, definitely. And we need to really celebrate those strengths in our kids with ADHD. Because otherwise they really do sometimes feel like they need to hide them and just really work on those challenging things that they're not good at. Because that's just socially acceptable sometimes in the world. And so I really like to find out about you and your kids' strengths for sure.
Yeah, and that's a great piece of coaching, right?
Right.
Because sometimes I think we get into these habit loops and it's not even intentional at a certain point. We just, when this happens, we respond this way. And it's before we pause for a second to think about anything. So
it's
having
just,
someone,
just habit that you may have not even thought of. Yeah, haven't even thought of it yet. Yep, for sure.
Yeah. So this was great. I mean, I really enjoyed this talk. Just this talk between the two of us as two parents who have children who are neuroatypical is so helpful. So that's one of the main reasons I would recommend, especially if you don't feel comfortable talking about it with someone in your real life. Maybe you don't have mom friends who have similar situations, or you don't want to talk about it with your family, your mom-in-law, or anything like that, etc. Though my mom-in-law is great about this. I think that, it would be really helpful to talk about it with someone who's been through it, who's done the training to coach you through like helpful, actionable steps that get you to a new place, to create a new habit loop that's just more positive.
Exactly. Yep.
Yep. So it's always a pleasure talking to you.
You too.
Again, I will link all of Maren's information in the description box down below, so be sure to check that out. And thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much.
As always, I really do appreciate everybody's time. So I wish you a wonderful day.